Hi, Greg. I'm sorry, I just stepped out for some coffee. I joined and nobody was here, so oh, okay. I'm, I usually don't. Good rule to have anyway, right? Okay. Sounds good to me. Yeah, no rain yet. Just wind. So, oh wow. Yeah. Right. Right. So you feel unprepared then when they talk about how you need to think about breathing, right? Hour and a half or so. Yeah, this one might go a couple hours. Yeah, I think we're scheduled 1 to 3 here. Okay, we'll give it a couple minutes then.
Okay, Chair, I am confident there's a quorum now.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here for the March or May 15th TAC meeting. So we'll do ask for approval of the agenda if there's any additions or modifications requested. And hearing none, we'll do approval of the March 2025 TAC Funding and Programming Committee minutes and roll call together by roll call vote.
So, Chair, we would need a motion in a second.
Motion and a second. Sorry. Motion to approve the minutes.
So moved by Mathis.
Mathis.
Second by OJ.
Jerry OJ, second. All right.
All
Joe,
right,
do you want to do the roll?
will do. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Carver County, Milky. Or I think I saw Flommer.
Yep. Aye.
That was Flommer, correct?
Correct.
You. Hennepin County, Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Rogenbuck. Scott County, Jessen. And I saw Scott. Washington County, Delheimer.
Aye.
Eden Prairie, Ellis. Egan, Mathis.
Aye.
Fredley, Kozlucher. I know you're here.
Oh, aye. Sorry. My internet's going against the wind today.
All right. Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering, Coster.
Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Genowiak.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Shoal, I believe, not Lore.
Correct. Shoals here. Aye.
DNR, Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike and Ped, Turner Bargain.
We're actually transitioning that over to Molly McCormick. I'm here.
We have at least two Molly Mix participating now. MnDOT. MnDOT Metro, Tag.
Wasn't there. I'll abstain.
State Aid, Colleen Brown.
Aye.
MPCA, AO.
I would abstain. It was attended by Lauren.
Okay. Met Council, MTS, Hinneker.
Aye.
And I'm almost certain Elaine Kotsuko's tab coordinator is not here. And she seems not to be, which means I'm going to be talking a lot. So Chair, we have 16 ayes and 2 abstentions.
Joe, this is Jake Chapik with Dakota County. This just jumped over me as present. So
Oh, you're right. There's your name and everything. Okay, sorry about that.
no worries.
17 and 2.
All right, thanks, Joe, for keeping score on that. And is there any public comment on committee business?
Chair, we were not approached. So I guess not.
No, I guess not. And Joe, will you give the tab report or?
I will be giving the tab report. Between Robbie not being here and Elaine not being here, you're going to hear me talk a lot today.
Okay.
So at TAB on April 16th, Hovland reported that the TAB Executive Committee met prior to TAB. The committee reviewed the meeting materials and had a status update on the regional solicitation. The actual transportation work group will met now on April 28th. And Hovland announced some new members. St. Paul TAB member Swara Jost, alternate is Matt Pravetsky. District H alternate Rachel Chinitz, and MPCA alternate Amanda Jarrett Smith, who has some history at this committee in the past. I'm not going to go into the MnDOT or MPCA reports directly. There was no MAC report. For the council, Deb Barber reported that there are 2 open seats, districts 12 and 15, and that a nominating committee will be set up. And the Suburban Transit Association made a report as well, saying that Southwest Transit launched 494 fixed route service to the Mall of America and the airport at the end of March. So business, we had a streamlined tip amendment from Bloomington, CASA 34 sidewalk, curb ramp, and signal project to add multi-use trail and intersection and increase the cost of local funding. We had MnDOT 5310 bus program where we approved the cost reduction of 4 of those project lines. We had a streamlined tip amendment for the CFI grant program where we awarded that council to add that to the tip so it can award CFI grants, which is charging infrastructure, and a program year extension for Washington County's County Road 19A realignment project from 2026 to 2027. We had 4 info items on this highway harm system. Washington County presented on their safety planning and implementation, an ABRT transit plan from Metro Transit, and we had some regional solicitation evaluation updates from Steve Peterson, and I believe the consultant, maybe just Steve. It's a while ago. And that's all I have for the tab report.
Just me.
Great, thanks. Any questions from anybody? All right, I guess we'll get on to business. And first item is 2025-18 scope change request for MVTA.
Thank you, Chair. I will summarize this a bit, and then Heidi, who is our member today, is here for questions if we need them from the applicant. So MVTA is requesting a scope change replace generalized improvements for 53 bus stops and shelters with enhanced improvements for 8 stations in its technology and ADA enhancements project. So the MVTA has awarded $500,000 in surface transportation block grant funds in 2022 in the transit modernization category. The application was going to fund elements such as e-paper signage, which I had to look up myself, which kind of like signage that almost looks like a tablet up against the wall of a transit station, real-time signage at 53 stops and shelters, indoor kiosks at 4 MVTA transit hubs, platform displays at 3 sites, and the implementation of bus stop beacons, smart lighting, text-to-speech buttons, and enunciators. So what MVTA is reporting is some logistical challenge with the electrification of 53 different bus stops, as well as testing that hasn't really occurred with the e-paper. And so as a result, they're interested in shifting from 53 stops to 8 specific locations and doing more with their money for each. So looking at the analysis, it would be impossible for us to suggest that this project as applied for in an adjustment now would not have been funded, because every project in that category is funded. That's the transit modernization category, save for one project that couldn't be funded because we do have a limit to how many ABR or bus rapid transit projects could be funded. So the original application budget was not very specific. It didn't specify like how much money was involved in each of the the e-papers or anything like that. And you can see that they broke it down 250,000 in wayfinding, 375,000 in transit systems. Now you can see the 8 locations that they're proposing to fund now and the financial or the funding breakdowns of each of those to get to the 625,000. That's $500,000 federally and $125,000 of match. So they're requesting retention of the full funding. The original application didn't have a lot of specifics to assigning funds to project elements. And given the small amount of this cost, it's kind of difficult of this project. And given that factor, it's kind of difficult for us to attempt to suggest specific reductions. So therefore, staff recommends approving the request with no funding change. I'm here for questions about the process, and Heidi is here for questions about the project.
All right, thanks, Joe. And maybe Heidi, maybe you'd like to speak to the requested change here, just in a general sense.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, I appreciate your insight as well. Like Joe had said, we thought that the innovation of the e-paper would be further along. If we are not able to get electric connection to a shelter, we have to rely on solar. And unfortunately, the technology is just not developed in Minnesota for the climate. And then the solar has not come along as we had hoped for. So we're trying to shift gears, but still add customer amenities and enhance those 8 stops and refocus, put the money to good use for our customers.
All right, thank you. And I noticed some of the elements in the original application, and it appears in the modification will be will provide some ADA upgrades to the stations. Is that correct?
Correct. So it looks like I can ramble off a few of them. So indoor interactive kiosks, platform displays, announcement, text to speech buttons, and PA systems, implementing bus stop beacons, and then smart lighting as well.
All right, thank you very much. Members of the committee, is there any discussion, any questions that you have? All right. Nathan, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I think where I could use some clarity is, I think just on the merit of going from 53 to 8, we should be in a position to understand that a little bit more, looking at past applications and how TAC's going to look at that, as well as TAB. So some clarity for me would be, it sounds like we're doing more at 8 stations instead of just saying it costs more. We're trying to provide more benefit at each of the 8. So instead of having 53 locations where 53 might get a little bit of each at 53 spots, 8 are gonna receive more of the full suite of improvements that were listed in the application. Is that a good way to come away from like understanding like what's being proposed here? Is like 8 really good stations as compared to like 53 that we're going to get a little of something?
Nathan, that's a great question. So yes, I think you're exactly right. We're definitely going to be implementing more of array at the higher usage facilities, customer facilities. And keep in mind, the 53 stops originally in the application could have meant signage, not necessarily technology based. Joe, I'm having a hard time finding where you put in your action submittal, but you summarized it really well. If you remember what you had put on the change, I see it now. So it says at the very bottom of the background and purpose that MVT is requesting request retention of its full federal dollars because the overall project cost remains unchanged and elements being implemented are being constructed in facilities with a larger footprint. So therefore the higher cost per implementation. I think that summarizes that nice. Did I answer your question?
Yes. So Chair, the way I'm understanding this is we're doing more at 8. And you said there could have been lighter touch at the remainder of the 45 stations. Is that something that was reviewed as far as like if it was as simple as signage, or is there budget limitations or just not as much cost benefit to just do very light touch at other the other 45 as outlined in the application.
One thing that we don't mention in here is that a lot of our bus stops, so simply a sign, is being replaced where it could be local service, but there's not as many riders with the implementation of microtransit. So we still need to have those bus signs, but we're not seeing the ridership at those bus signs. We're seeing a move towards microtransit. And so we do really feel like these 8 locations that we're focusing on are really where our riders are. And we're going to hit the most customers at once.
Yeah, Chair and Heidi, thanks. I think that's a really good part of the narrative that could help as this advances, is just like identifying like the cost benefit as you're seeing user trends change and how you're adapting and deploying the federal funds to its maximum extent practical to the highest use stations. That's what I'm taking away. That's the last question I had.
Thank you. Good question. Other questions? I guess I'll weigh in. I'm just curious about the other 45 stations, the kind of remainder, and would there be a future rollout of some of these elements outside of the solicitation? Is that kind of a plan as, you know, as you test out or implement, you know, at your higher use stations? Would this be something that's then, you know, expandable, let's say?
I love that question. We are going through a bus sign revamp. That's phase 1 is rolling out in 2025, and then phase 2 is in 2026. It is not federally funded, so you guys will probably not hear about it, but eventually, hopefully you see the updated bus signs. But that's going to include QR codes. So there will still be enhancements, not only just to the design, but just accessing the route information, customer service information on the signage, but it is not federally funded.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Comments? If none, I'd entertain a motion, and I think Joe had provided a sample motion if somebody would like to make that, or otherwise.
Chair, I'd move approval of the motion. This is Mathis.
Thank you, Russ. Is there a second?
Second by
Innocent.
OJ. Give it to Innocent. Give it to Innocent.
Great,
Yeah,
Innocent.
Innocent Teo with the MPCA. Second.
Yeah, I have to scratch out one person, put the next. Okay. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Plummer.
Aye.
Buell.
Aye.
Let's see, Ramsey County yet? Scott County yet?
Yep, I'm here. Aye.
Who was that from Scott County?
This is Adam from Scott County.
Adam, gotcha. Thank you. Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Mathis.
Aye.
Eden Prairie yet? Lucher.
Aye.
Homie.
Aye.
Coster.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Weber.
Aye.
Janowiak.
Aye.
Scholl.
Aye.
Gunnar Walsh.
Aye.
McCormick.
Aye.
Peg.
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
Ayo.
Aye.
And Peterson, Steve.
Oh, it's me, Joe. Joe.
I think that's Cole, yeah.
Oh, Cole's the member. My bad. Is
Yep, no problem.
that an aye?
Yeah, aye.
So doing TAC.
All right, Joe. Next item is 2025-19. Am I correct? That's adoption of the draft 2026-2029 tip pending public comment.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to have a brief presentation, and then Aaron Tagg from MnDOT is going to have a nearly as brief presentation. So let me open that up. It's the wrong. Sorry, I was not prepared with this. I should have been. Nope, that's MnDOT's. Good for me. All right, so some of you have seen a presentation very much like this before, and it's not much of a much one, but I know that we do have some turnover, so every so often we'll go through this. And so this is the 2026 to 2029 tip, and every year we put forth a tip, and it's kind of one of the key things that the council does as the MPO. So a TIP is a 4-year list of transportation projects funded in whole or in part with federal funding. Any project that receives federal funding must be in the TIP. MnDOT drives a lot of the way that we report our TIP. And what MnDOT has chosen to do is they actually put the state funded projects in there as well. That's not a requirement. That's kind of above and beyond, but I think it enables us to have some flexibility with funding sources and color of money without a lot of larger scale changes to the document. So I think that's why they do it, though maybe Aaron's got a better answer. Nobody's ever actually told me that, but that's the value I see anyway. So all projects funded with federal transportation funds or any project that is considered regionally significant by our definition. Last, in this current tip, we actually do have a couple of projects that are locally funded with no federal funds that are in there because they are regionally significant. Although I think going into this draft tip, they actually both have federal funds now, so it's not the case with those two projects anymore. All MPOs are required to have the tip. We're required to have them updated almost every 4 years, but we and all the MPOs in Minnesota follow MnDOT's schedule of 1 year of updating the tip every year. And then the tip is incorporated into MnDOT's statewide transportation improvement program, or STIP. And in order for a project to receive federal funding, it needs to be in the STIP. The STIP is reflective in our region of our tip. So here's our process for this year. Everything except for the years on the tip in the top row, that should say 26 through 29. Other than that, this is right. And so TAB will be releasing it next week for public review. Under normal circumstances, this meeting that we're talking today actually would come the day after TAB does that. There will be a public meeting in June and a 45-day public comment period where we will get, based on history, anywhere from about 5 to 205 comments. And then TAB will move the tip forward for recommendation to the council in August, and then the council will see it in September. What happens after that is that MnDOT incorporates it into their STIP and then federal approval. I don't know if that'll slow down this year or not, but it's typically early November. That November, December is a little bit pessimistic versus recent history, which is closer to November 1st. So here's what we see in the tip now. It doesn't change drastically from previous years, but we have about $6.4 billion in the draft tip. That could change moderately as we go to the final tip after public review, where we have about $1.8 billion of federal highway funding, $1.2 billion in federal transit. Local and state money is $2.5 billion, and then some trunk highway funds, just under $1 billion. And you can see the breakdown where highway and transit take up the lion's share of what mode of projects are in there. We have bike ped only down there in the green, and the reason we say bike ped only is because that does not factor in any bike ped elements you might see in some of the other modes. And then others and set asides and TDM, there's a lot of set asides in the tip where maybe we have money to put in cable median barriers as needed, and that kind of falls into the purple along with TDM projects and some other things. So that is roughly equivalent to the trends that we've been seeing in the tip since I've been here for 10 years. And then transit, I have a slide to go through transit, as Aaron will have several slides to get into bike ped and highway. But so any transit project with federal funding, whether it's capital operating, has to be in the tip, much like I mentioned earlier. And that's federal formula funds like Section 1507 and things like that. Transit projects funded through our solicitation of CMAQ funds, kind of like the one we had in the last item. FTA and DOT competitive grants, and then any FTA new start to small starts projects are word in there. And I think you do see a lot of the sort of big numbers in the red there are a result of some of the ABRT and BRT projects coming through, shown in TIP. And that's really all I have to talk about the TIP, but I can try my best to answer questions about it. I don't know everything about every project, to say the least, but I would do my best to answer that. Otherwise, Aaron is here to talk a little bit about how MnDOT got to their program of projects, and it looks like he's taking control. Good. And then after that, we can talk about it and try to move the item.
Great, thanks, Joe. Aaron?
Right. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to focus more. It's probably going to be a little bit more MnDOT focused for the TIP/STIP /ATIP, which I will get into here in a second. So as Joe mentioned, the TIP ends up getting incorporated into the STIP, which is the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. There's kind of 3 levels of TIP/STIP. So the Met Council does the TIP. That essentially becomes part of the ATIP, which is the district, metro districts, or each MnDOT district has their own area transportation improvement program, which is for us very similar to the TIP, except it also includes projects from Chisago County, which is the 8th county included in our district that is beyond the Met Council area, and then that gets incorporated into the STIP. As Joe mentioned, includes all MnDOT projects, whether they're federally funded or state-only funded, as well as other federally funded projects and those major projects. MnDOT submitted the draft ATIP to our central office on April 15th. It's due on tax day every year. And then shortly after that, it was sent over to Joe to get incorporated into the TIP. And then, as Joe said, STIP is usually approved in the fall, late winter. I think we are a little worried about the approval timeline this year from Federal Highway, just with reductions in staffing that they've had there. We do have some concerns with that. I'll note that all my numbers here are for the ATIP, so they might be a little bit different than Joe's, which are just for the TIP. So these include Chisago County as well. The ATIP includes 680 lines of, I don't want to say funding, but I'll just say 680 lines. Sometimes you might have multiple sources of funding on one line, but you also might have many different lines for one project. I think the winner right now, at least from the highway side, is the Highway 65 project up in Blaine. I think has something like 12 or 13 different lines in our ATIP. So a little over $6.4 billion worth of projects or costs over the 4 years of the STIP. About almost 2.4 billion of that is projects that are going to be led by the state. And then you can see in the ATIP where the different funding is coming from, a lot from the feds, some from the state, bonds, and then also a lot from the local agencies for all the projects in the ATIP. If you look at the MnDOT-led projects, I'm going to focus on that. For the rest of the presentation here, you can kind of see how the money comes in and where it goes. So in blue here is the MnDOT, I'll call it the formula funding. So this is the formula funding that MnDOT gets that is distributed out to the districts by a formula. It's roughly half federal and half state. We spend almost all of our federal money on projects. There's a tiny little sliver here that didn't even get a label. that is a little bit of project development for the federal funds. But the state funds, we use a lot of those for project delivery. So that includes things like consultant staff, right away, change orders, agreements, things like that, that are much easier to do with state funds versus federal funds. And then the other part of the state funds are used for projects. Almost all MnDOT projects have some federal funding on them. So there's very few MnDOT projects that we have that are state-only funds. Almost all of them have federal funding. Then the red here, we have, I'll call it additional funding that we've received, either from the state or the feds. A lot of it is COC funding from the state. So the majority of the additional state funding that we've received is for the 3 COC projects here. And then on the federal side, a large part of that is the grant we got for the 494 Part 2. And then as part of IIJA, there was the Bridge Funding Program, BFP, that we are starting to see wind down. 26 is the last year of BFP funding. So some additional bridge funding that we got that is expiring. And then the greenish color here is other funding that we have gotten or get for part of our projects. Some of that is the cost participation or local match for projects that we're getting from local agencies. And then some of that is essentially funds that the locals have gotten from other entities like regional solicitation that are then going into MnDOT projects. With the cost, the matching, I'll note that there's 2 projects that eat up about half of that. One is the Highway 13 COC project, and then the 243 project is the Osceola Bridge, and that is actually state of Wisconsin is contributing to that project. I'll just quickly go over some of the major projects that are in this step for this year. So for fiscal year 26, we have the big 65 project, COC project, as well as a number of regional stations, reconstruct of Highway 8 up in Chisago County, the reconstruction of the bridge over the St. Croix near Osceola, a big pavement project on Highway 77 down in Dakota County, and then Highway 12 out in the western part of Hennepin County, pavement project there. In 27, we have the Highway 13 COC project that also got some regional solicitation dollars. And then the 494 Part 2 project, finishing off the vision for 494 in the South Metro. 28, we have 2 projects on Highway 65, Central Avenue, one in Minneapolis and one north in Columbia Heights, Hilltop, and Fridley. That will reconstruct Central in coordination with Metro Transit's F-Line ABRT. And then a big pavement rehab project on Highway 169 down in Shakopee. And then in fiscal year 29, we have Highway 3 and the part in Dakota County. 25294 is going through the EIS process right now. So that is currently showing in 29 number of regional solicitation projects with that. Then we have a Highway 7 project out in western Hennepin County. There's also a study going on right now related to the Highway 7 in that same area that may influence what the ultimate scope of that project is. And then Highway 100 big pavement project kind of north of 394 up to 694. This was a project that we actually had in 27 last year, and as we tried to balance things out, got moved to 29 this year. I guess one thing I'll note, is every year we get targets from central office about how much money we will get each fiscal year. 26, 27, and 28 were pretty close to the targets we had from the development of the last STIP, but we typically see a drop in our target as we move from the CHIP, which is years 5 through 10 of our program, and outside of the federal STIP. As those projects move, as those targets go from the CHIP to the STIP, we often see a drop of around 10%, but we saw a much more significant drop this year, about 30%. And so our target cut for 29 was close to $150 million. So we had quite a bit of project shuffling to do in development of the STIP this year. So we had a number of projects that we had scope for 29 that didn't make it into 29 that will probably become 2030 projects. And that's all I had. Any questions for me?
Thanks, Aaron. I have a question for you. Just generally, I'm presuming that the investment numbers overall and in the larger categories, like Joe showed the pie chart, are staying relatively steady, but I'm kind of curious as to what your insight might be. And, maybe that's something that could be brought to the TAC or the tab.
More from the investment type,
Yeah, I was thinking more from the investment type, investment total, and look at the past few years, and see is there a trend here? Is there something that's illustrative of anything that's happening?
Thank you, Chair. I think from an investment total standpoint, should have put a slide in here for that, but we've seen kind of an increase over the last few years. A lot of that has been the BFP funding. And 27 is actually one of our smallest program years that we've had in a while. And then it starts going up again. And part of that is we see the influx of IIJA formula funding, the BFP funding coming in, and then kind of, lowering. And then as we look out further, we see some of the additional funding that we got from the state starting to really start to kick in. And, I mentioned the drop in target in 29. A big piece of that is just how we are able to decide how much money we have to spend. The CHIP is based more on forecasted revenue, versus the STIP is based on how much the legislature has actually appropriated out of the trunk highway fund to give to MnDOT to spend. So just because it is coming in and going to the trunk highway fund doesn't mean that the legislature has given us approval to use that. And so there's a little bit of I'll call it a lag there between more money coming in and actually showing up for MnDOT to use. From an investment type standpoint, I should have had a slide on here about MnCHIP. So our state highway investment program really guides how MnDOT invests the funding that we get. And our last MnCHIP, which was updated a couple years ago, shifted the focus, I would say, a little bit away from mobility and a little bit more towards what we're calling main streets and urban pavement. So that was an area where we saw as kind of a shortfall, was those urban arterials really within the metro district, but then outstate in greater Minnesota, those state highways that kind of act as the main street in those smaller towns that were hard to kind of do right with the funding investment guidance that we had in the previous MnCHIP. Hopefully that helped answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's great. Those descriptions are, and kind of that summary is excellent. I appreciate that. I did have one other question. I was just wondering if there's impacts. Should any of federal funding be reclaimed, let's say, at the federal level, and how that works with the plan.
Yeah, no, there were definitely, if we see even impacts to grants we've gotten, that will have an impact on our program and deciding, what we do with those projects that had grants if, we, have them counted on and we don't get the funding for them. I guess, 2 examples is, 494, we got a really big grant for. And that one, we have a signed grant agreement for that. We feel like we're in pretty good shape on that one. But in January, we got an announcement of a grant for Highway 3 Roberts Street for fiscal year 27. And we don't have a grant agreement for that. That was announced right before the new administration. So that is probably one that we're a little bit more concerned about actually getting those grant dollars. If we saw a decrease in federal formula funding, it would definitely have an impact on the program here. I mean, you can see how much of our program is made up by that federal formula funding. So that would definitely have an impact.
All right, thank you. Joe, you had your hand up and you're probably just thinking that we need to move along.
No, not necessarily. If folks are curious, they should be curious. No, I was going to follow up on a couple things Aaron had said. He had mentioned that there were 680 lines in their ATIP, which includes Chisago County. So I would just throw out that we have 621 lines, and that's without Chisago County, and also about a dozen or so in these little areas of Wright and Sherburne County. It's this sort of light gray. It's a little hard to see maybe on your screen, but I think as many of you know, because of the census, we do have a little bit of our urban boundary, or metropolitan area boundary, I should say, going into Wright and Sherburne counties. And so I work with District 3 to get some of their information every year, and that wouldn't have shown up on anything that Aaron had either. So it's kind of, our region is basically Metro District minus Chisago plus these 2 areas, these 2 little small areas. So it all creates a little extra headache and a little extra explanation when we talk about who really goes in the tip. And then I believe the STIP is made up of all the ATIPs, and our friends at Metro or at Central don't even have to worry about who's with which MPO, but we do have to do this.
Great, thanks for the clarification, Joe. I appreciate that. And so any other comments, questions? Joe seems to think we have a little time, so. All right, seeing none, I guess I would entertain a motion.
I didn't make the motion to adopt the recommendation.
OJ second.
All right, Joe, you want to call the roll?
OJ.
Aye.
Plummer.
Aye.
Chapek.
Aye.
Ewell.
Aye.
Jessen.
Aye.
Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Mathis.
Aye.
Lucher.
Aye.
Homie.
Aye.
Coster.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Weber.
Aye.
Chinowiak.
Aye.
Scholl.
Aye.
Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
McCormick.
Aye.
Peg.
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
Ao.
Aye.
Hinneker.
Aye.
Chair, that's 20 ayes and no other votes.
And I think Robert Ellis maybe
Oh, did you?
came in a little bit late, yeah.
Oh, I did see that. I apologize. Ellis. Well, either way.
Okay, thanks. All right, we'll go on to the next item, I guess, and that is 2025-20. It's corridors of commerce, local screening and recommendation for the city of Anoka's Highway 47 BNSF Railway Crossing Project. And Joe, going to need your background on this one for sure.
Chair, I need Steve Peterson's background on this one for sure.
Go on, keep it going, Joe. You're doing great. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll take this item. And this is a little different than maybe in the past rounds of corridors of commerce. So they've set aside what amounts to $22 million for readiness funds out of the 2023 session. And readiness funds can be used for projects for, as it says, planning, scoping, pre-design, preliminary engineering, environmental analysis. And so they are doing a special solicitation just for the readiness funds. And you can see the 5 phases are shown on the bottom of this first page. So MnDOT did a project solicitation where people could submit projects. And now we're at phase 2, which is the local screening and recommendation. And each of the counties in our area can screen and send in up to 2 projects. And the Met Council, with consultation with the Transportation Advisory Board, can also send in up to 2 applications for scoring. So this doesn't mean we'll recommend this project, one project over another. All it means is that they're whittling down the list, MnDOT is, so that they can do cost estimates and other things on a smaller listing of projects. So in this case, the local counties will be the, I'll call it a nominating sponsor for most of these projects. And the reason that we have this action I'm going through today is because one of those projects, there were 7 projects submitted in the MPO area. If you go to the next page there, Joe. There were 7 projects submitted, and 3 of which were within the Anoka County border. 2 were submitted by Anoka County. 1 was submitted by the city of Anoka. So in working with them, we said that we could be the sponsor for the city of Anoka project. In part because we funded a regional solicitation project there last cycle. And so the project that you're being asked to recommend and further on to the Met Council is the Highway 47 BNSF Railway Crossing Project. So this was given some money in the last solicitation, and it's to take Highway 47 over top of the railroad tracks where they has been rated the most dangerous crossing in the entire state here, so a major safety issue. So that's what we're doing today, is asking for your recommendation on that specific project. Again, this is just one phase of a multi-phase process. I should note that a letter of support from the MPO also does get points in the project scoring, which is phase 3. And so we have attached a letter of support for all 7 of the projects. So they'll be on equal footing going into the scoring, at least from the MPO process. The other attachment at the end of the item, and this was asked for in the legislation, was we need to reach out to the local legislators, state legislators in this area. In the case of the City of Anoka project, that was Senator Jim Abler and State Representative Zach Stevenson. So we did our due diligence there and reached out to both of those state senator and state rep, and they have provided letters of support for the project too. So they wanted to get the local legislators either approval or disapproval of said projects, and as I imagined, both of those sent in a letter of support. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you and see if people have any questions here about this action today.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Any questions or comments from the members? And I'm not hearing any. Steve, Joe. So I'll ask for a motion to support the recommendation of staff here.
This is Jerry OJ with Anoka County. I make a recommendation for the motion provided.
This
Thanks.
is Drew Flauber. I'll second it.
Thanks, Jerry and Drew. Appreciate it. Joe, do you want to call roll?
Sorry, I was muted. OJ.
Aye.
Plummer.
Aye.
Chapek.
Aye.
Ewell.
Aye.
Chesson.
Aye.
Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Mathis.
Aye.
Ellis.
Aye.
Kozlucher.
Aye.
Homey.
Aye.
Coster.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Weber.
Aye.
Janowiak.
Aye.
Scholl.
Aye.
Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
McCormick.
Aye.
Tag.
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
AO.
Aye.
And Henniker.
Aye.
Chair, that's 21 ayes.
All right. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Next item is our informational items, Regional Safety Action Plan, and Heidi Schallberg, I believe, has a presentation on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe, should I bring up slides or
Go for it.
you? Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heidi Schallberg, Transportation Planner here at MTS. I just wanted to give you an overview of a project that we wrapped up at the beginning of the year, Regional Safety Action Plan. We originally had the full consultant team presenting to the TAC last fall, but the project wasn't complete yet then. I'm just kind of go through kind of some of the higher level things and elements in the project and where you can find more information. So this was a study that we did as a follow-up. You may remember a few years ago, we did a pedestrian safety action plan. And so this one is focused on vehicle crashes and then bike vehicle crashes. And of course, we're emphasizing reducing fatalities and serious injuries, kind of consistent with the safe system approach. We're looking at the whole MPO planning area with this project. I'm not going to go into details about the safe system approach in this presentation. I will note that MnDOT gave a presentation to TAC last month about the safe system approach if you're interested, as well as their plan that they've been working on and how to implement it in their work. So that would be one to take a look at if you are interested in that. We worked with a consultant team and then a technical advisory group with, I think, many of your agencies were involved in that in some form for that. So there are different ways that we want to use this work. One of the applications or potential applications for it is that we did want this plan to meet the requirements of the new Safe Streets and Roads for All program. That's at the federal level. It's a discretionary federal funding program. There's still 2 years of funding available in this program, and that's designed to promote safety and work toward eliminating fatalities and serious injuries from traffic crashes. And so that program is really using a structure to have agencies develop and use safety action plans to guide that work. I've included the URL for their USDOT webpage on this. Note that there is a funding opportunity for this year that is open now with a June 26th application deadline. They have a little over 580 million approximately, I think, for implementation, a little over 400 million for planning and demonstration grants. USDOT has done some webinars on this, so if that's something that you're interested in, those should be posted on that webpage. We've been happy to see that we've had a lot of local communities have success in getting some of these planning grants to develop their own local plans. And then so far we've had 2 communities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, have success in getting implementation grants as well. And of course, we'd love to support other communities getting those even more. So we wanted this plan to be something that could be a base for local communities to potentially apply for some of this additional funding. So there are different types of funding in this program. Planning and demonstration funds, you can apply for funds to develop your own local safety action plan, or you can do supplemental activities. That's kind of a wide range of work. It can include road safety audits, kind of more complementary plans that may have a more specific focus like speed management, and then demonstration work. So kind of pilot temporary approaches to kind of test out concepts. The implementation funding is really where that more permanent work would be funded and can also fund behavioral or operational strategies as well. So I did want to highlight that. Just kind of the key aspects in the project. Again, I mentioned we worked with technical advisory group with our partners to do this, did some public engagement, just kind of state of practice review, what common approaches are, trend summaries. We identified high injury streets for the region, and then also did some more proactive analysis, systemic analysis, where crashes may be more likely to happen, crash rate analysis, and then used those analyses to kind of identify the top corridors, both in the region and by county, higher level countermeasures, and then programmatic recommendations. So that, in addition to, having a plan that could potentially help position locals in applying for that federal Safe Streets and Roads for All funding, there are other ways that this could be used, and of course help look toward how can we prioritize our regional funding to make sure that we're really addressing some of the issues. Of course, one of the council's roles too is also supporting local comprehensive planning and local planning. And so agencies that may not have done as much safety planning, some of us could point to areas where there may need to be additional work or audits or inform projects that may be done not primarily for a safety role, but to maybe point toward that there's a concern in that area that should also be addressed. And then, of course, one of our roles as an MPO is to regularly monitor how the region is doing in meeting our federal performance measures on reducing the numbers of people who are killed or seriously injured in traffic crashes. So this is when we can try to help track how the region is doing toward that, towards implementing some of these things. So I mentioned the engagement. This was a little bit of two-part where we had a suggestion from the local partner when we were scoping this, just to try to pull from what we had heard from individual agencies, from what you're all hearing in the work that you're doing. So we had an element of that and kind of got varying degrees of level of detail on that, but that did also kind of help point us to maybe some groups that maybe not as well represented sometimes in safety conversations. And so we did have some project-specific engagement for this work where we worked with community-based organizations to do some focus groups and had one tabling event as well that we participated at in a larger event. So the groups were not necessarily all based on geography. So some of them were like ARC Minnesota with people with different types of disabilities. And really the focus groups were focused on, these are examples of some of the infrastructure. We'd use photos of existing infrastructure in the region to prompt conversations about what people's concerns were, what they wanted to see in their communities. Unsurprisingly, probably to many, one of the things that was really a common finding in this was just that people feel safer when modes are separated, kind of whether you're driving, walking, biking. And then other findings just that those systems, kind of interconnecting all of our systems, right, for all of our modes is really important, and not just traveling along a path, but being able to cross safely as well. Clear signage, of course, important for anybody, no matter how you're traveling, so that you can make clear and appropriate decisions. Speed is also something we commonly hear about, wanting to see slower streets where people live and where people are trying to go in their communities. And then just some specific feedback. Roundabouts can be great for slowing down drivers, but have to be kind of designed with some sensitivity to, they can be a little bit more challenging for some pedestrians to navigate. And then lighting at different scales as well. So for the crash trends part, there's you could probably spend the rest of your life just talking about different ways to analyze crash data. I'll note for this project, we used data from 2018 through 2022, which was the most recent that was available at that time. So this is just one example among many. There are two documents that are posted on the project webpage with lots of information on different crash trends and by mode. So this was just kind of one example from that analysis where we looked at crashes by functional classification. You can kind of slice and dice that data in different ways. So when we just kind of look at the numbers of fatal and serious injury crashes, for example, kind of minor arterials are the top type of functional classification for that. If you want to try to normalize that by different contexts, when we looked at it, normalizing it by roadway miles, that did kind of flip it, where then interstates became the top one for that data. But it's kind of referred to those documents. There was a lot of information available in those. But using the existing crash data, one of the key pieces of analysis from this project was to identify high injury streets at the regional scale. So this is something we know some of our local partners have done for, you know, individual communities, but wanted to see what this look like for the region. And this is a kind of a common methodology now in doing safety planning. So this is looking at not where just crashes that have already happened, and it's looking at where there are concentrations of severe crashes. So those fatal and serious injury crashes, where those are happening more repeatedly over a 5-year period. So it's not just kind of each individual one, but where there might be concentrations of these. So we did do the analysis by mode. I'll note we did bring pedestrians into this aspect of the work. So we did have a previous pedestrian plan that did some kind of precursor work to this, but we did want to bring that in so that we had it for all modes for this identification. And so we did the analysis by those 4 modes separately, and then they can be brought together, showing kind of all of those layers together. Also note this does not include freeways in this analysis. Those are just really fundamentally different operationally, and those are not typically included in this type of work. And then it's really primarily focused on those fatal and serious injuries. For the modes for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists, we did include minor injuries for those, just simply because the numbers of crashes are maybe a little bit smaller, but they are weighted lower in the analysis. So the more severe crashes are weighted higher in priority in the analysis. We did look at whether or not we should include that for vehicle crashes. And frankly, when you look at minor injuries, it just really overwhelms the analysis. So this is really where you're kind of taking like a what they refer to as a sliding windows analysis, kind of like a window of like a mile length, stepping through the network and measuring how many severe crashes you have. So you have kind of a rolling density of severe crashes by mode. And then you use thresholds to basically kind of say, is it on the segment or not? So it's just really kind of a simple binary on or off. And oops. When this just kind of shows you the thresholds that we used in the region. So really kind of a key takeaway from this analysis for us is that about 31% of the severe crashes in the region are happening on just under 2% of our non-freeway roads. So this is really kind of a big red flag for the region to start, and we need to make sure that we're addressing these areas. It's not the end all be all of the analysis, but it's a really important area to make sure that we're starting to address. With the thresholds, we did have them a little bit different for each mode. We did consider geography for pedestrians, where we used a little bit higher threshold in the urban center communities. So that's Minneapolis, St. Paul, and inner ring suburbs, or many of the inner ring suburbs. And then a little bit lower one for all the other community types. And also MnDOT took a similar approach to using different thresholds like that in their statewide analysis that they did as part of their vulnerable road user safety assessment. So then next, we also looked at not just where crashes have happened, because that's one way to look at it, but you also want to try to be proactive and gauge where they may be more likely to happen. Where can we make some improvements to try to prevent these from happening? And so the crash risk index is that more proactive systemic look. So it's taking a look at road segments that are sharing risk characteristics. And so that's for us in our analysis turned out to be, which is pretty common in a lot of areas, number of lanes, AADT, and posted speed limits. And I will note this part did not include the pedestrian crashes and like the high injury streets. So just kind of a simple overview of what this process is. You're adding context to those, like the road characteristics, comparing those across, and then calculating that risk. This is just kind of an example of what the map looks like for bicyclists overall. So that we found where roads with speeds over 30 miles an hour, AADT of over 9,000 and 3 or more vehicle lanes. I also note this could be used for pedestrians. We did a different type of proactive analysis in the ped safety plan, but this could be applied to pedestrians as well if you used it in combination with proximity to transit stops, which was really one of the key risk factors that we found in that previous analysis. And then you could just kind of see how the map changes a little bit when we look at it for the vehicle crashes, how that map roads, there were kind of not as many of the larger roads with the higher scores compared to the bicyclists on that. And then I didn't have the slide for this, but I didn't mention too, when we were scoping the project, we had a request to include crash rates as well. So we have crash rate analysis that will also be included on the map online. So that's where we're looking at higher numbers of crashes compared to traffic volumes that might point to some underlying issues to address. So then really using this analysis, these different types of analyses, we kind of looked at that and then cut down like what ones really fell out as kind of the top 25 corridors for the region from each type of analysis, both the reactive and the proactive. And then I don't know, this does not consider where work may already be planned. So this is just really kind of that snapshot in time based on that data analysis. So that's one piece to kind of follow up on is like, you know, where have communities already planned to do some work in these areas to address some of the safety issues, but it could also point to maybe areas that haven't had some of that planning to see where we might want to support those. We also did a list for each county then up to 10. So not every county had 10 locations based on the data analysis. And I will note those lists are based on geography. So just solely the roads in that county, not road ownership. So there may be MnDOT roads, county roads, city roads on that. And then next for the countermeasures, there's a lot of work out there for countermeasures already. This study did not get to the level of detail of recommending specific countermeasures for specific locations. So be clear about that. There's a toolkit posted on the study website that's really just kind of organized into 5 main categories that we were seeing from the data analysis throughout the project. So they're kind of grouped by speed management, pedestrians and bicyclists, roadway departures, intersections, and then there's a small one for cross-cutting treatments such as lighting or surface treatments. And just also recognizing these are primarily focused on infrastructure, but that there are other strategies and initiatives that should also be considered. Many are included in resources like NHTSA's countermeasures that work with that. And so the tool point to estimated implementation costs and timelines, just kind of a brief summary of effectiveness, and then also that connection to that safe system roadway design hierarchy tier. Then the last section we'll touch on, the study made kind of 5 overall programmatic recommendations for the council's work. Cover the first 3. The first one is pretty basic, just the frequency of keeping this analysis updated. We started with a focus on pedestrians, but for future updates, we'll be combining all modes into one, and the recommendation was to do that approximately every 5 years. On that, I'll kind of note the high entry streets, that's not something that would likely benefit from more frequent updates because you would only be changing 1 year out of the 5 years of data in there. So that identification would be less likely to change, but we could look at potentially doing an interim update before the next full update. Safety in all policies, you may have kind of heard some similar phrasing in the context of health when we talk about health in all policies. So kind of a similar idea of looking at how we can really build planning and addressing safety in all of our work that we do. So one of the council's roles is supporting comprehensive planning work and support that's done by local partners. So we're looking at ways to incorporate safety into that and provide resources. And then one aspect I didn't specifically touch on, we were also updating the transportation policy plan, as I'm sure you are all well aware, at the same time as this project. So one part of this project that we're not specifically calling out in this project work is that we did ask the consultant to help review the previous transportation policy plan and make some recommendations for revisions. And we just kind of brought those into that overall transportation policy plan update process that we were using and folded in with the other input that we had. So those are not called out specifically, but also recommending that when we're doing future updates to kind of also take a look not just at the safety specific sections, but look where we may have policies that could potentially have unintended impacts on safety, such as increasing speeds, which is one of the important things. And then also providing some technical support. We'll be working to get an online map. I'm a little bit behind on this, but we've got some cleaning up to do to make the data really clear and have that available for you online. The maps are online in static form. Those are posted on the study webpage that I'll have a link to at the end. And then the next two really are kind of focused on funding applications primarily. So I'll note some of these may potentially be able to be considered in the regional solicitation evaluation that's currently underway for the next round, which would be 2026. But some of these other recommendations too would be beyond that. They're not something that would be done on that timeline. So I just want to keep that clear. It's kind of different tiers of recommendations and timelines. With that, there's a recommendation, the safe system road design hierarchy. That's something that MnDOT has already kind of built into its big book of ideas, which is their road safety strategies reference. And, you know, looking at ways they can implement that through other things. There's a recommendation that we might try to look at how to develop regional guidance for using those 4 tiers of more effective treatments to less effective treatments. But that would be, again, for future work. Evaluating our funding processes, which of course we're doing and do on a regular basis, but also, again, trying to look at how we may have unintended impacts of non-safety focused ones. Benefits cost ratio would be an area for future work. So that would not be for this next solicitation funding round. There is some work that's been done at the national level. A National Cooperative Highway Research Program project did make some recommendations on how this could be modified, but sadly that has not been published yet, so we don't have that. But just some of the issues with it is if you're just relying on historic crash counts, you can sometimes undervalue the potential impact of projects that may be trying to be more proactive. And then sometimes undervalue some of the things that may focus more on projects that address safety for people walking and biking. So that's just kind of an area for future work. We also had a suggestion from one of the local partners on the project to explore the need or opportunities for the council to potentially help fund local safety planning work and what that might look like. And then again, just using the plan analysis and the council decision making where that makes sense as far as using high injury streets and crash risk index. And just the last 2 slides are just examples of ways that that could look like with, you know, kind of different tiers using those top 25 lists for both the reactive and proactive analysis, then the overall regional analysis. And then I do want to make sure to call out too, we do have, as I mentioned, you know, a lot of local partners that either already have some of this analysis done or are developing that through the federal grants that they've received to do local safety action plans. And so want to make sure that that planning work, whether it's been done at the local level or the statewide work that's been done as well, is also included in that. But really kind of one of the starting points if we're looking for existing safety focused projects is where do we know we already have issues? And that's really where those high entry streets can help point to that. And just another example of how this could be kind of in combination if we were looking at projects that maybe don't have safety as their primary goal, this would be one way to potentially use those or different combinations there. That's kind of the end of the overall of the project. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions, but did want to provide the URL. I can drop a link into the chat, but I know need to have that available for streaming. That's where the documents are, and be happy to try to answer any questions if you have.
Thanks, Heidi. Great presentation. Any questions or discussion on this? Yeah, Emily.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Heidi, for the presentation. You kind of touched on this, but but just kind of recognizing that a lot of cities and counties are working on their own safety action plan. What kind of, can you speak a little bit more about the kind of coordination that has taken place with those specific stakeholders potentially, just to kind of understand or ensure that they're taking a consistent approach with this planning effort?
They are in different stages at this point. So I think, some like Minneapolis has long kind of done some of this work already with having high entry streets for quite a while. Some of it was coordination with having partners on the technical advisory group. One thing I will mention too, like this is also kind of not, the analysis that we've done is not necessarily going to always match. So that's not necessarily an area of concern, right? It's just, we're looking at it at a different level. We're looking at the regional level. So we may use different years of data, may use different thresholds with that. I think kind of some of the key aspects for coordination for the ones that have gotten the federal grants, some of those are really kind of key requirements for those grants as far as using that safe system approach and really kind of focusing on the fatal and serious injuries and prioritizing those rather than trying to reduce all crashes. We're not trying to primarily reduce property damage, only crashes. But so that's certainly an area of kind of ongoing coordination, I think, to keep abreast of where different local communities are at and how we can support their implementation for that, but also encourage more of this work. So I don't know if that helped answer it or not, but
yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I'll note that this does not preclude. I think there was a concern from a local partner when we were starting this project about whether this would preclude them being able to get funds. I will make it really clear, like this was not funded through the federal grant. So there's not a concern about having a regional identification out there and being able to pursue the local ones. With that wouldn't require that. If you were using the plan to try to qualify for some of those other funds, then we would definitely need to have some of that closer coordination.
Good point, and that potentially could be a side benefit, though. Beneficial outcome of the plan itself, right? Is that you do have something that maybe documents a condition that is helpful.
I will also mention one thing from the TPP too that we had as potential strategy that we haven't really talked about a whole lot as follow-up is kind of the idea of whether we have like a regional safety task force. And so that would be another potential venue if that were applicable to make sure that we're kind of coordinating in this context.
Great. Other questions, comments? All right. Well, Heidi, that was a really good presentation. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your work on that and looking forward to the update.
Thank you.
All right. Next, I think we have Tony Fishcer on the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measures Study.
Thank you, Chair.
Hey, there it is. All right. Thanks. Go ahead, Tony.
Great. Nice to be with you all today. My name is Tony Fishcer. I'm a transportation planner in MTS, and I was the project manager on this Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measures project that's just finishing up right now. So this project was really looking at the way we estimate greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the way we do it, and in other cases, places where we haven't done it in the past, and creating those methodologies from scratch. We were looking at 3 of our products. We did look at the Transportation Improvement Program that you saw earlier today. We looked at our long-range plan and the regional model and the way we estimate greenhouse gases for that. And we looked at the regional solicitation where we have not estimated greenhouse gases in the past, but we looked at what parts of the current methodology could support that estimation and what would be needed to really get to those numbers for greenhouse gas emissions from resulting from different project types. So we did produce a guide for calculating greenhouse gas emissions, pretty detailed document with references that's available upon request. And we did this work in consultation with state and local partners. So this is an outline of the project, and for the most part, today's presentation. We had pretty typical project management. We had state and local stakeholders involved in project management team meetings and technical advisory committee. We'll have a final report shortly. And then really we kicked off the project looking at our existing methods. Some cases, like I said, where we are already estimating greenhouse gas emissions, and then other cases where we weren't getting to that GHG estimate, but we had some steps that were going to be helpful for those estimates. We did go out and look at the universe of best practices, some national and more local experience people have. We worked through recommendations for methodologies. We took a bit of a sidestep and looked at a couple of places where we've been inventorying greenhouse gas emissions for the transportation sector and made some recommendations there, just to make those consistent and keep bringing those forward as we do this kind of work. And then we finished the project implementing a tool that's supposed to help streamline this the work in practice. So the current methods for the regional station, we do not measure greenhouse gas emissions. But we have a number of measures that are valuable. Transit ridership is helpful. When we evaluate travel demand projects, we get an estimate of that commute trip reduction, very helpful. And then Synchro in the past has been required for a number of roadway projects, and that is capable of producing fuel consumption estimates, which is a pretty easy step then to get to the greenhouse gas emissions impact. Also for roadways, we were definitely evaluating the benefits of reduced delay, and then now with these measures, you'll see that we're considering that, but really in the inverse when we think about the induced demand that reduced delay causes. And I should just go back to that first bullet point that recognizes that these methods are really aimed at a low to moderate level of effort, just recognizing that the efforts that stakeholders put into these project applications. When we looked at the transportation improvement program, we found project type data descriptions and cost estimates. So pretty limited data in the tip available. With the transportation policy plan, at the time we were looking at the 2040 forecast model, and that's our activity-based model. It takes in the future transportation network, land uses, population, and jobs, and then produces that future transportation performance measures, including, importantly for this work, vehicle miles traveled. In that, with the regional model outputs, we put that into an EPA motor vehicle emissions simulator model that actually takes in not just VMT, but speeds. It applies a universe of vehicle types, and then outputs those GHG estimates. So that's the current process, essentially. We did kind of a deep dive into the way the travel demand model estimates induced demand, and we're basically finding that it accommodates it accounts for about half of induced demand that we see in the scientific literature. Probably just the way we use that model, we expect it to account for short-term impacts, but less so longer-term impacts, such as the way transportation investments affect land use, and then the land use circles back to affect transportation. We do not consider construction impacts when estimating greenhouse gas emissions in the TPP. So when we went out and looked for best practices, we found some national examples. We found a lot of West Coast examples. In some cases, we were able to use more local parameters. In other cases, we currently are using the parameters that came with that work. And it's just an opportunity to improve this process, these estimates in the future. We did pay particular attention to the work MnDOT was doing at the same time, which was the carbon reduction strategy work, where they came up with methods for estimating greenhouse gas emissions. We didn't always land in the same place, but we're definitely cognizant of each other's work. So some of the things we're keeping in mind when we looked at these different methodologies, there are methodologies that really focus on tailpipe emissions only. And with this project, we were aiming for more of a well-to-wheels estimate of greenhouse gas emissions. A good example of why that's important is when we talk about electric vehicles. They can be described as zero emission vehicles. However, that is a zero emission at the tailpipe only. And we wanted to account for the emissions from the electricity generation. Luckily here in Minnesota, our electricity generation is getting quite a bit cleaner. So over time, that definitely becomes a smaller factor, but in the interim, it's important to account for. There are methods that rely on before and after estimates of activity, and there are methods that really just apply an elasticity to the activity. And we did end up with some methods in both those categories for this project. Again, we're trying to get to that well-to-wheels estimate of emissions. So things like transit vehicles, we did consider the emissions from diesel or the emissions from electric transit vehicles that would be different. Just to be able to make those consistent comparisons. We did consider the way people shift to say new transit routes or new bike facilities. Not all those trips came from SOVs, so we have some small adjustments to reflect that some of those trips maybe weren't made before or came from other transit or from biking or other modes like that. And then finally, we did lean on methods, or we did 100% land on methods that result in estimated greenhouse gas emissions in tons. We didn't carry forward any methods that really just applied a percentage to an inventory. And that was just, we thought that was a better language to have this conversation in. So when we got to recommendations, we incorporated a lot of feedback from partners. We had conversations around the tip with MnDOT. We had a number of meetings with Met Council and MnDOT staff around our activity-based model and how that feeds into the TPP estimates. And then we had 5 working groups looking at different categories of regional solicitation projects. We did try to reflect past regional solicitation applications in terms of transit, bike pad, TDM, and roadway projects. And then we brought in a couple of types of electrification type projects just to be prepared in case that's the direction the regional solicitation goes this time around. So in every step of this project, we're trying to balance the effort against the precision and completeness, just trying to be aware of everybody's limited staff time and resources to do this work. Again, we're trying to account for well-to-wheels emissions whenever possible, and then capture the benefits and disbenefits of different projects. Again, just so that we can compare these project types against each other without any kind of bias creeping in. I mentioned we're looking at national best practices. In some cases, we were able to apply regional specific parameters. In other cases, that's an opportunity for future improvement. And then, yeah, we had some recommendations on how to collect some data from future projects to improve those parameters. So I probably won't go through in detail, but I've got a slide on each of those 5 project types for the regional solicitation. Importantly, in the transit category, we're really starting with the ridership forecast. So those are developed. Those methods reflect kind of the expertise of our transit partners here in the region, and then we're taking that in here to get to the greenhouse gas estimates. In terms of travel demand management, the regional solicitation in the past has had commuter trip reduction estimates, And so we take that in, we look at the different trip distances in the region and the different vehicle types in the region and produce that greenhouse gas estimate. We also, in this umbrella, we considered shared mobility projects, and then really looking at, we had some research, I think it was out of California, that demonstrated the benefits of different shared mobility project types on local communities VMT. And so that's what we tried to apply with this method here. For bike ped, there are really two parts. We look at the type of improvement that's being made, kind of the before condition and after condition, and then we have a lookup table for different parameters that get applied to the average annual daily traffic on a roadway or on a parallel roadway. And so there's credit given for how busy that corridor is. And then there's also greenhouse gas reduction credit given for how many key destinations are along that corridor. And this definition of key destinations came from the research that produced those different parameters. This is a case where this time around, we don't have a consistent map of the region for these key destinations. But so we could have applicants provide that and then ask the scorer to just provide some consistency across those. But in the future, it's an opportunity for us to create that kind of a map that we can all use for our applications and assure that consistency. In electrification, we looked at public EV charging, and the method really relies on essentially the electricity that's dispensed gets converted to anticipated miles that are not being driven in gasoline, but being driven with electric charge. And then we get greenhouse gas estimates for the gasoline version and electric vehicle charging, and calculate the difference there. We also looked at outreach events and the impact there. We had a survey results from a partner, Drive Electric Minnesota, had done a before and after survey at one of their events, and they were able to get a sense of how many people they thought maybe were prepared to buy an electric vehicle that weren't previously. I think the parameter we're using is 4%. And then we use typical ADTs per vehicle and are able to calculate greenhouse gas emission reduction for that. We did not pay any special attention to medium and heavy duty vehicles in this work yet. For roadways, we were looking at what Synchro could provide. We did do some updates to just some of the emissions factors in that were kind of out of date. We didn't always have build and no build scenarios for the modeling, but in a couple cases we did, and we were able to compare those estimates to some other approaches, and I'll circle back to that in a little bit. But we do have an element here where we're considering induced demand for project types based on delay reduction. So for the TPP, I mentioned we did that comparison of induced demand, what the results of the TPP we're getting, and then what the literature suggests. We recommended some updates to EV forecasts just to be more current. And then we had recommendations around upstream and life cycle emissions across different vehicle types and fuels. We didn't make a specific recommendation around construction emissions. It's something that's available through MnDOT's Minnesota Infrastructure Carbon Estimator. There are reasons to do that, but it is work, so we didn't have a specific recommendation there. When we looked at the TIP, we concluded that there really wasn't sufficient information there to produce our own estimates of greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to continue with conversations with MnDOT and other project sponsors around how we can get those greenhouse gas estimates in the TIP, and really for transparency's sake and for our partner, or for the public to understand the impact of our projects. So more work needed in that area. Just a slide, some details you can look at on your own time about what we found when we looked at the greenhouse gas emissions inventories and the recommendations we made. It wasn't a large focus of this project, but we thought that was important to look at as we were developing these methods to make sure that the inventories were kind of up to the same speed, so that as those different values are compared, they're consistent. So to implement the methods, our consultant ICF did produce an R-based greenhouse gas emissions estimator. And so this is supposed to be a really easy to use map-based tool. You select your project location, and that has some back-end data attached to it, kind of local, typical, VMT per capita, things like that. And then it allows you to input certain data, say transit ridership in the case of a transit route. And then this tool is able to calculate the VMT impact and the greenhouse gas emissions impact. The tool is available now for testing if you want to try it out. The link's below. Designed in a way that staff at the council can maintain this tool and improve it over time. And so we'll be doing that in the lead up to the next regional station. So I mentioned that we took the synchro outputs of fuel consumption and translated that to greenhouse gas emissions estimate. We were kind of disappointed when we took those synchro models and into SimTraffic. We got pretty different results. And then we also looked at the CMAQ tool and got different results again. So not fully satisfied with the results we're getting there. We might want to look at some other methods where we inventory projects that have done a much more thorough evaluation. Maybe they've gone through a full environmental document. They have much more detailed modeling, and they have much more precise estimates. If we can build a database of the different results from different project types, we can start to understand kind of where to expect different project types to fall and what parameters might affect those results. So some more future work. We did test a number of projects in the tool that we've built. This isn't meant to be, these were just a small sample size of projects. You'll see that outlier under transit that happened to be a large mobility hub. And there are definitely some questions around, does all that shared mobility serve really the population within a large, a 3-mile radius or a smaller radius? And so we need to circle back and look at some of that work. So just one of those details that we need to clean up before the next regional solicitation. So next steps for the project, this work supports the special issue working group for climate and the work they're doing right now. I mentioned we want to continue to improve that R-based estimator tool. We want to improve some of the parameters that we're using that could be resulting from different projects. So that could take some time. Some work to do around roadway projects, potentially a different approach to that. And then like the TPP, the Minnesota's infrastructure carbon estimator could be used to evaluate projects for their construction embedded emissions, probably in the future if we want to think about kind of the opportunities for low carbon steel, low carbon concrete, just opportunities on job sites to use more electric equipment, things like that. Might be a reason to use that Minnesota MICE tool. So we had great help from Stephanie Kong at ICF, and with that, I'm just happy to answer any questions.
I can jump in here. This is Michael Thompson. I think that I am vice chair, and I know Jim had to jump. Any questions for Tony? All right. Seeing none. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Joe, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Is there anything else to cover?
All that's on the agenda now is other business.
Okay. Does any Do any members have any other business to bring up today? All right, Aaron Mendot.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to mention that MnDOT will be doing the statewide freight investment solicitation coming up this summer. It looks like it's going to be released in late June with applications due, looks like in probably early September. That will be for fiscal years 30 and 30, 29 and 30, about $25 million each year spread around the state. I think one thing to note for this year is they're looking at projects for this that would either already be exempted from the greenhouse gas legislation or not need to go through that process. So either exempted or not capacity expansion projects. I think that the reasoning for that is to try and keep it more simple this year and not have to worry about meeting those requirements. So just wanted to announce that and let everyone know that that is coming down the pipe. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. All right, any other members with other business? Going once, going twice. Okay, I think we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Michael.
Mm.